ASP.NET Core is the web side of .NET Core development. Under this umbrella are four major components: Razor Pages, Blazor, MVC, and API. All these project types can coexist in the same website without an issue, and yet they all fill a different role. In this video, we're going to look at Razor Pages, the quickest and easiest way to create powerful server-side web applications in C#. We'll look at how to set a project up, how to capture and display data, and how to deploy it. Now, before we proceed, I do want to point out that in the description there are links to get the source code for this video, a link to sign up for my mailing list, and a link to sign up for my Patreon page. You'll also find links to courses there with more information on the topics we cover today, in case you want to go into further depth. Now, if you haven't come across me before, my name is Tim Corey, and my goal is to make learning C# easier. One of the ways I do that is by teaching context. There are a lot of tutorials out there that will teach you what to do. I go a few steps beyond that to show you when to do it, why you should or should not do it, what pitfalls to avoid, and what the best practices are. Basically, I get you ready for the real world. If that's the type of training you're interested in, subscribe to my channel and hit the little bell icon to be notified when I release new videos. Now let's go to Visual Studio, and we're going to create a new project. And we'll create an ASP.NET Core Web application. And this is the umbrella project that then expands out to be multiple different types. So let's hit Next, and we're going to say this is a Razor Pages UI and the Razor Pages demo for the project name and solution name respectively. Hit Create. But before it actually creates it, it's going to ask you for a few more pieces of data. First of all, we're going to select .NET Core, ASP.NET Core 3.0. So as of the time of the recording of this video, this is the latest released framework. There is 3.1, which is in preview, but we're going to choose 3.0. I'm going to choose a web application. A web application uses Razor Pages. Now, I did say that these different types can coexist in the same project, which means that even though I select an MVC project, that can have Razor Pages in it. And if I choose a web application, I can still put MVC in it. And API can have both MVC and Razor Pages inside of it. Okay, so we're going to choose web application though, which comes out of the box having Razor Pages set up. That's just the easiest for getting started with Razor Pages. Now, I am not going to choose authentication for this video, just because it adds a layer of complexity that I don't think is necessary for what we're doing. I am going to configure HTTPS, make sure that box is checked. That should always be checked. This will allow you to use SSL in development, and it will allow you to enforce SSL in production. And that's a really good thing. Google actually will downgrade your website anymore if you don't have an SSL version. And I believe an SSL version is on by default. Okay, so they're starting to crack down on that and really push you towards having a secured website, even for what we call a standard web application. So make sure you have that box checked. We're not going to enable Docker support. We're going to leave Docker support alone. And we hit Create. And what it's going to do is going to scaffold out for us the basic project, which is pretty quick. Now it is in the background, down here in the lower left-hand corner, it says restoring or restore complete. And if we do a build here, it's actually going to pull down our NuGet packages we need. So it's actually pulling down NuGet packages, and now it's complete. So this is our basic template. Okay, right out of the box, clean and fresh, this is what we get. If we start this, we actually have two options, IIS Express and Razor Pages UI. What's the difference? Well, IIS Express means we're going to run our website using what essentially is IIS, or Internet Information Systems or server. It's what you would deploy to if you were going to deploy on Windows. So it's going to mimic very, very closely what you'll get in a real web server environment. That's great, but there's another even better option. And that's the one that goes after the name of our project. So Razor Pages UI is our project name. It's also listed here as an option for starting. So Razor Pages UI. That means we're going to use what's called Kestrel. And Kestrel is a command line web server. So when we launch this, what's going to happen behind the scenes is going to start a console window, and it's going to launch our web application from that console window. One of the benefits of doing that is we get to see exactly what's going on to and from our web server. We see all the traffic, what's happening, what commands are being rejected, what things are being missed, what errors we're throwing. All that information goes across that command line. Now, if you choose IIS Express, you don't see that command window, but it is in the, I believe it's the output window. I always get these windows down here confused. There's so many of them. But I believe it's the output window will show you those same commands. But I'm going to choose Kestrel, where I'll launch this just to see what it looks like. Okay? So here is that console application that's starting. And now we have our website loaded. So notice over here it says we've got 200, meaning success, on loading the icon. And up here we have a 200 for application JavaScript, a 200 for more JavaScript, and for CSS. These 200 messages mean a success message for a call to HTTP. Okay, so we're calling out and trying to get, in this case down here, a file. Up here, it's a JavaScript or CSS file. We're getting those files and they're successfully coming down. If I click privacy, notice that we get a couple more messages that come up, including 304s. Okay, so we're getting messages and seeing what's happening. So there's a browse to /index with a 200 message. So you see all these different things coming across the wire. This can be very, very helpful for debugging. I just want to point that out right up front. Now I'm slightly zoomed in here. I'm at 125%, but this is the standard look for an out-of-the-box, never configured Razor Pages user interface. Okay, just want to point out what it looks like. Okay, so now that we have this, let's talk through what are the features. Well, first of all, let's look at that page itself. So we were loading index, which is actually just this. Because under shared, under layout, this is the actual page. Okay, so under the shared folder, underscore layout, this is the actual page, but then right down here on line 34, it says at render body. And what happens is we inject our Razor page into that section, that line right there, line 34, where it says at render body. So we're injecting, in the case of the default, we're injecting our index page. And so it puts this code right here, all this code, lines 1 through 10, and it puts it in layout right here on line 34. Okay? Which means that if you want to modify the overall page, you come to this underscore layout and you make changes like, well, it's almost 2020, so let's, change this to say 2020 and be ahead of the game. And instead of Razor Pages UI, we're going to say, I am Tim Corey, something like that. Okay, that's who copyrighted it. All right, now that'll be reflected on that every page because all the pages are going through this standard layout. Now, I'm assuming you've seen some of this before. If you've gone through my intro to ASP.NET MVC, which is actually a .NET framework, ASP.NET MVC, you will see pretty much the same stuff as far as the layout page is shared and the at render body, and a lot of this stuff is being the same. However, there's a key difference. So I'm going to point out differences here. I'm not going to try and go over everything all over again. that video is still very much relevant to today. But I do want to point out that .NET Core, so ASP.NET Core Web applications, whether it's Razor Pages or MVC or Blazor, they use Bootstrap 4 as their framework. Notice down here we see Bootstrap, but the version of Bootstrap is 4. So under www root, which I'll explain in just a minute, if you see JavaScript, lib, Bootstrap, and then the dist, if you look under the JavaScript here, look at that Bootstrap, you'll see at the very top it says, this one is Bootstrap version 4.3.1. Well, in .NET Framework ASP.NET applications, it's Bootstrap 3, typically 3.7. So what's the difference? Can we upgrade? And the answer is no, not really. You really want to stay on the major version of Bootstrap that you were launched on. Okay? And the reason why is because there's massive breaking changes from Bootstrap 3 to Bootstrap 4. So that's why Microsoft has stayed with .NET Framework gets Bootstrap 3, and new projects in .NET Core get Bootstrap 4. Okay? So this is the latest version of Bootstrap available. And Bootstrap allows us to lay out our pages in nice, clean ways. It's a nice framework that allows us to do a number of things. If you're not familiar with Bootstrap, I'm going to pull up a browser here. Go to getbootstrap.com. And first of all, I want to highly, highly commend the team who makes Bootstrap. This site is amazing. This is the gold standard for documentation. You want to follow this if you create your own application, okay? So first of all, notice the upper right-hand corner says 4.3. Well, if you're on a .NET Framework project and you're using 3.3.7, I think it was. But you dial in the version you want, and that's the documentation for that version. Okay, so latest is 4.3.x, which I believe ours is 4.3.1. So with that, now we can go to the documentation. Notice I'm here, click the documentation, and now in here, you can find documentation for practically anything you want to do with Bootstrap. So for example, layout. How do we do layout? Well, there's containers, and here's how it looks. And then there's a fluid container, and here's how that works. And there's responsive breakpoints, and here are the sizes. Okay? And then you keep coming down here, and it will talk about z-index. And then you go to grid. Well, how does a grid work? Well, there's how the grid would be laid out. And there's an example in code, and there is the example in HTML. Okay? So here's the options, and here's the layouts, and here's how you do it. Okay? Then you go to content, and it talks about topography. So what the different sizes is for your H tags, which you can modify, but here's the standards. All right? Code, how you do inline code sections, how you do block code sections like this, how you do variables, user input, images. Here's how you do images. I'm not going to go through the whole thing and show you everything, but I'm just so very happy with this documentation. I often find myself just going getbootstrap.com, go to documentation, and then look for what I need. Components is usually where I end up because I'm usually looking for something specific, but forms, there you go. There's all your different examples with how you do a form and different sizing and stuff like that. Progress bars, boom, there you go. Okay? So enough about Bootstrap, but especially if you're newer to HTML, CSS, and JavaScript and you're not quite sure what you're doing, that getbootstrap.com site will really help you. If you don't know what you're doing at all, just visually scroll through the list. See what it has. And then you'll see options, see how it renders. And if maybe you want this, you just take their code and put it in your place. Okay? So this is all Bootstrap style HTML. And Bootstrap is just a framework on top of HTML and CSS and JavaScript. You don't have to use it, but it makes layouts and uniformity and all these kind of things very, very easy. So it's a pretty common one to use. Okay, so that's Bootstrap. That's what we have in Razor Pages is Bootstrap 4. So just note that that's the version to use. Okay, now I pointed out briefly that this www root folder right here. Okay, this is new to .NET Core projects. In .NET Framework projects, we kind of didn't have a great story for static resources. But yet the web has a lot of static resources. We have CSS files and JavaScript files and maybe image files and all these other things that we kind of put into the standard Visual Studio project structure, and it just didn't work that well. It worked, but not ideally. And so a team, when they were rethinking how .NET Core was going to work, and they were looking at ASP.NET in particular, they said, let's create a place for static resources. So there's this folder called www root in every project. And in here, the root of this folder is what will be on the root of your project. So notice the favicon is just right underneath www root. Well, if you go to layout and we look in here, it's somewhere in here, I thought. Oh no, you know what? You don't have to specify it. It just pulls it. Sorry. So it just pulls it and finds the favicon in the root of your web directory. Well, it's going to pull that icon because of the fact that it's in the root of www root. Okay? So what's going to happen with our Razor Pages content is it's actually going to inject it into this www root structure. Okay? So anything you put here will get brought over into the site starting at the root. Okay? So the root /css/site.css. Well, we have the root, which is that tilde, and then we have /css/site.css. Okay? That refers to this file right there. Okay? So that's the basic layout and structure. We do have a lib folder, and this is where you bring in external resources. So Bootstrap, jQuery, jQuery validation, and unobtrusive jQuery validation. You can bring your own in here and drop them in there, and that's kind of the structure for how you would do that. All right? Now, let's talk about the basics of how Razor Pages works. If you notice, under Pages, there is our _view imports, _view start. These are pages to help us get started in Razor Pages. But then we have 3 pages: error, index, and privacy. These 3 pages are our kind of our intro pages or our template pages to show us what could happen. Now, index is our default page. This is the page that will be loaded if you don't give any URL. Like if you just have the main URL but no like slash this or that, then this index page is what loads. Now, if you're loading a regular web server somewhere else with just HTML, no .NET or anything, typically your starting page will be called index. Index.htm or index.html. That's a typical starting page. In PHP, it would be index.php, typically. So for .NET Core, it's going to be index.cshtml. All right, that's just their version of the starting point. So it's kind of an industry standard to call it index. Now, from there, we also have privacy and we have error. Okay? Now, let's look at the index page. The index page has a few things on it we need to see. First of all, it has @page at the very top, line 1. This indicates that it's a Razor page. Now, the @ symbol, whenever you see the @ symbol in a Razor page or MVC, it indicates the Razor syntax, which is a little confusing because of the fact that the Razor syntax works in MVC, not just in Razor. Okay, so there's a couple different things called Razor. One is a syntax, one is the page. Okay, so this is a Razor page that's using the Razor syntax. So the @ indicates the Razor syntax. What that indicates is that this is C# code that we're running on our web page. The nice thing is it also demonstrates for us exactly how to use the Razor syntax. So you can either do it inline, so the @ page and @ model, like so, or you can have multi-line with these curly braces. So @ curly brace and close curly brace, and then inside you have C# code. All right? So either way works. It depends on your circumstances what you need. So we have the @ page saying this is a Razor page. @ model, this says index model. What is that index model? This is the data that's associated with this page. You'll only ever typically have one model. And that's actually what we'd call the code behind if you're thinking about WinForms or web forms. Okay? That's what it looks like. It's actually the page model. That's what's called page model. And it's this right here. Okay? And we'll look at this in just a minute, but that's what that model is. Now, if you're familiar with web forms, which is from ASP.NET, and this is going way back in ASP.NET. Web forms came out, I believe it was C#2. Okay, so way back. I don't think it was out for 1, but I'm not positive. But it was very, very early on in the C# lifecycle that web forms came out. And this was this model where you had web code on the front end, and then right behind the code you had C# code that would run in the background and do C# work. And it was kind of, the goal was to have something very, very similar to WinForms with that easy drag and drop and a code behind model, but for the web. That's something that is dying. That's going away. So a lot of people still love web forms. It's a technology you need to move away from, but it's one that people still have an investment in. Web forms is not going to be moved forward into .NET Core. It's done as of .NET Framework 4.8. That's the last major change or even minor change to web forms. The only thing it gets from now on is security fixes. Okay, that's it. So move off of web forms. That's what you got to do. Okay, but it had a similar model to this. However, this page, while it looks very, very similar, is under the covers radically different because it's actually an MVVM framework style. So we have our view, which is this index page, and we have our view model, which is called our page model. Okay, and that's this page right here. The cool thing is this is just a class, which means that we can actually do unit testing on this code behind. What I call a code behind, but really is the view model for our view. Okay, so that's a really big benefit because we can have better code coverage all the way up through our user interface. Okay, so we'll look at what this model does in just a minute, but this model is associated with this line number 2 here, model index model. Lines 3 through 5 is associating the text home page with the title property of the view data, which view data is it's a dictionary. It's basically this dumping ground where you put key value pairs. Okay, so in this case we can put title and we can say homepage, which if you go back to the shared layout, you'll see up here title. We're pulling from that view data, the title, and putting that value here. So every page you go to, it will change that version of the title. So it changes the layout page even though we're on the page that's just getting injected right down here. Okay, so that's what's happening here. And then we have just a little bit of HTML and CSS, right? Just enough for the welcome message. Okay, so that's what a page is on the front end. That's the view side of it. Let's look at the view model side of it, the page model. And the page model is just a class. So public class index model, it inherits from page model. And we have a constructor here that's asking for an iLogger. So if you've watched my video on logging in .NET Core, this is a logger. You can hook up whatever logger you want. Like if you want Serilog, cool, go ahead and do that. If you want nlog, hook that up. Whatever you want to do, that'll be injected right here. We can use that to, for example, log whenever we have a GET request to this page. Now, Razor pages are typically pretty simple. That's their goal, is be very, very simple. So unlike MVC, which has a wide range of verbs, and you can have multiple verbs and like for example, multiple different posts on the same controller, and you can have multiple different views in the same controller. This page model is just for this page, and typically you have one or two verbs, get and post. That's typically all you do. Get, the onGet right here, what this does is it's what renders this page. So this is the C# code that gets run when you ask for an index page. The post, which we don't have yet, but I'll put in just temporarily, public, I'm going to say void for now, but on post, like so. That would be run whenever you post data to this page. So those are the two verbs we normally have on a page. If we're only missing one, we'll be missing the post. We'll just have the onGet, because you may want to show a page, but not actually capture information off of it. For example, the index page, not really a reason to capture information off it. It's just showing us the index page, just showing us, hey, here's a welcome message. That's about it. However, if we were, let's say a sign-up page or a page to capture information about my address, okay, that page would have an onPost as well. So to have an onGet that displays the form, and then onPost that captures the data from the form. We'll see that in just a minute. Now, we typically, in fact we don't, pass data across the GET or the POST methods, not directly. Instead, we use properties. So if I had this property, let's call this ID. This property can be read by the index page. So if I were to say @model.id, that's going to pull the ID. Notice it's an int. It's going to pull the ID from this property right here. So whatever properties you have in your index model, you can display on this page. If you want to write to them, then you have to mark them as writable. And to do that, you say, in square brackets, bind property. Okay? So you're going to say, this is a bind property. And if I leave it just like this, the only way I can write to this ID value is if I post that data. So I can't put it in the URL. That'd be a GET. So I can't say, given the index page, $ID equals 4. That wouldn't work because this is post only. I have to have a form that I hit submit on that posts the data. However, if I wanted to put the ID in the URL, then I could just put in parentheses and say supports GET equals true. Now, I can either post to this data via form, or I can put it in the URL. I can say $ID equals 4. And now when you call the onGet method, the ID value will be 4. Let's try this real quick. So I'm going to change this property. Let's do first name. Okay. And you know what? Let's change. No, we're going to leave it right here. So we're going to have first name, and we'll leave it supporting Git. And that's all we'll do. We're going to change. Notice now I have a red squiggly saying ID does not exist. But up here, it says welcome. We're going to say welcome at model.firstname. And it's going to say welcome and my name, hopefully. Let's run this and see what we get. See if it actually works. Okay, so it's launching Kestrel. Kestrel's starting up. Now our page starts up, and it says just welcome. Why does it say just welcome? Well, I never passed a value across. So if I say question mark first name equals Tim and hit enter, welcome Tim. It captured that value off of the URL and said, oh, that's a parameter and it's first name property. And if we go to first name, we'll see that, yes, that supports Git. And so we're going to put the value into that property. Now on the page, we can read that property and display a value. Okay? We could get even a little more clever and say on Git, if, let's just say string.is null or white space for first name. So if it's null or empty in first name, we're going to say first name equals user. So hello user or hello Tim. Let's run this again. And hopefully, now it says welcome user. I go, well, actually, it's first name equals Tim. Hello, Tim. Okay, so we can start with a default value, and we can change it if the user overrides it with a parameter in the URL. That's how you do a get bind property. Now we're going to do a post in just a minute, but I want to show you just a little bit of how those properties work. Now for security's sake, you do not, and I want to emphasize this very, very clearly, you do not want to send data across that URL that's in any way sensitive. Absolutely no passwords, no credit card information, no social security number, really probably not even their name. Typically, we just do IDs. Just to say, okay, give me this specific record, and that's it. Do not put information on the URL that's in any way sensitive. And by sensitive, I mean personally identifiable information. Okay, I just want to be very, very clear on that. Typically, this is just an ID, but I just use this as a demo because it's very clear and easy to see. Okay, now I want to show you how Razor Pages layouts work, meaning how does it work to know where to get a page or how a page URL layout is. Well, right now we have everything on underneath pages. So error, index, and privacy. If we launch this site and look at the privacy link, it says /privacy. Okay, it's right off the root. So this is the root of the URL. This part right here where it says HTTPS, notice we're testing in SSL mode, HTTPS localhost 5001. That's the root URL. But then here I have /privacy. And what this does is it says this is the path to that specific page. Notice it's not privacy.cshtml. It's just /privacy. This is how Razor Pages routing works. It works based upon the path from pages in relation to pages, which means that if I add a folder here and I say this is going to be forms, and then inside here I'm going to create a Razor page. This Razor page will be empty. I'll hit add, and the page name is going to be, let's call it add address. Okay, we'll use the generate a page model class checkbox. Make sure that's checked. That's going to generate this code behind file. That's the view model. We're not going to use a partial view, or not create a partial view. We're going to a full view, which means a full page essentially, not a part of a page. And we're going to use this layout page. We're leaving this blank, which uses the view start file, which is down here, which that points to our underscore layout.cs HTML page. So we hit add here, and it's going to create a page called add address. All right, we're going to use this as our sample for how to post data. It takes a bit to restore the packages necessary to scaffold out our first form. Okay, that's why it's taking a little bit. It actually downloads some NuGet packages. But in our add address, there's not much here. We can put a space here and it says add address. That's it. You can put a space there as well. So let's start our web page back up, our application. We're going to browse to this add address page. Well, if we just said /add address, we get a page cannot be found. That's because it's in the forms folder, and everything is relative to the pages folder. So pages is the root, so I say then it's forms/add address, and there's my add address page because it's relative to the root of pages. So it's inside the forms folder, and then there's add address. If I wanted to change where that page was located, I could just move it to a different folder, and I've changed the URL for it. Obviously, that's not something you want to do very often because it would break a whole bunch of links. So let's figure out how to create a form here that will take in a user's address. Street address, city, state, zip code. Just those values. Normally, we would start with just creating a form here, but we're going to wire this up to our model, which we don't have yet. So we could put in the code behind, let's close all of this. We could put in the page model all the properties we need. So street address, city, state, zip. But that's not really how C# works normally. Instead, we normally have a C# model. And in MVVM, we have model, view, and view model. This is the view model. The form, or the view is this form page. And then our model itself is going to be a separate C# object. So let's, in the root of Razor Pages UI, I'm going to create a new folder. We're going to call this models. Inside of here, I'll create a class. I'm going to call this my address model. It's already public. So I'm going to create a few values here. String street address, prop, tab, string city, prop, tab twice, state, and prop string zip code. If you're not familiar with US zip codes, they are strings, even though there's only numbers in them. So in the United States, we do not have letters in our zip codes or our postal codes. They're just numbers. However, there are some zip codes that start with 0. You cannot have a number that starts with 0. It's going to be stored without that leading 0 because that's not valid for a number. It's not a reason to have a leading 0. So therefore, a zip code is not a number, it's a string. That's one of the many reasons why it's a string. There's other reasons as well. For example, you don't add and subtract zip codes. Okay, so that's the address model. Now what we're going to do is in our, what I call our code behind, or our page model, we're going to create a property. So prop, It's going to type address model, control dot to add our using statement for that location. And I will call this address. And I'm going to make this a bind property. I am not going to make it a bind property that supports Git. Just a bind property. On Git, I won't do anything. On Post, I'll capture these values. But let's go back to our view and let's create a form. Now, I'm not going to make this all pretty. I often debate this, but the reality is this is talking about Razor pages. To make this pretty is more a conversation about Bootstrap. So I'm going to try and not do too much extra stuff beyond Razor pages. So we're just going to make a basic form. So form method is post. This is important because this tells the form tag, here's how you submit this. So when you hit the submit button, which is a key button, then it's going to send this as a post, which we have on Git typically and on post. If we have data, well, that's how we're going to capture is the on post. So we're going to make sure that it is sending via post. I'm going to have a few inputs. Input. And this is going to be type equals text. And next, this is a really nice feature. ASP dash. Whenever you're in an element in HTML, pretty much any element, it probably has something that is a helper from ASP NET. So what you do is you type ASP dash. And if you notice in the IntelliSense, well, it's going to be gone now. ASP, notice it says ... after the dash. That's because it's in relation to this element. So it's going to load that list once you hit dash. You hit dash. Now these are the things you can do with an input item. These are all helpers. I want the ASP-4. What this is going to do is allow me to point to a specific property in my address model and say that's what this relates to. That's what this links to. So if you have data in this property, display it in the form. If you put information in the form and post it, that's where it goes in this property. So in this case, I'm going to say address. Notice I don't need the at model first. So address dot street address. Okay, so I've linked this not just to a property, but to a property inside of a property. So I have the address property, but inside a or an address model, there's street address property. So that's what I've linked to here. Now I'm going to say placeholder, and I'll say street address. And I will close out my input. Let's do this 3 more times. And we'll have city, state, and zip code. Don't forget our placeholders. Like so. So now I have a form that has 4 inputs for street address, city, state, and zip code. I have a button now. The type equals submit. That's that special type that's going to say, when you click this, send all this data back to the page model, to our kind of a code behind. And it's going to do that via post. So now back over here, we need to capture this information. So let's have a public iAction result. This is the typical output from a post because we do some type of action when you submit a form. Whether it is go to a different page, go to a different site, or even refresh this page and clear out the form. Whatever it is, we have some type of action we do. On post, and that is a key word. So Razor Pages looks at this and says, okay, I am going to see an on and then the action, the verb. So get. This is a get call. So on and then post, this is the post method. Now it's yelling at me right now because I have no return value. So let's create a return value. Let's do a little bit of model validation. So if model state is valid is false. So if there's something wrong with our values that came in, maybe you didn't fill out a field that was required, then we're going to return page. Otherwise, return, and for right now, we're going to redirect to page, and let's redirect to the index page. Okay, so ./index. Okay, and that's what we'll do. We'll redirect to that page like so. Let's put a breakpoint right here. Now our model state is going to be valid no matter what because there is no validation on it right now. We can change that in a minute, but for right now, we're going to leave this alone and say, yep, we want to add an address using the /form/add address page. But I don't want to type that every time. So let's go back to my shared page, go to layout, and up here you see this nav bar where we have 2 navigation links. The really cool thing is they've already done the work of demonstrating how these work. Just copy a LI section, which stands for list item in HTML, and paste it. Now just follow the instructions essentially. Where it says index, we're going to change that to forms/add address. And where it says home, we're going to say add address. Now we have a link directly to our form. Click the run button to run this. Let's make sure you did put that breakpoint. We did. Now we have Kestrel starting up, and we have our page, and we have this add address. There's our address form. Really not pretty, but it works. Street address, city, state, and zip code. Let's put something in. So 123 Oak Ave in Scranton, PA, and 18, something like that. Okay, that's close enough. So there's an address. I'm going to hit submit. I just hit the is valid, and it said the locals say that the is valid is true. But let's expand this out a bit and look at the address. This is the value, the property right here. 123 Oak Ave, Scranton, PA 18551. There's our address in our model. I didn't have to pass anything in to this on post. I didn't have to put any values in here, have a model and have JSON post to it. Nope, none of that stuff. That's all handled by the compiler. That figures out how to link those things up using this bind property. Also note, we're using that bind property without the get, which means it can only post to it, but we did just update it. Okay, so that's working. And now if we were to hit continue, that page is saying, oh, I can't find index. Okay, so we have a bad URL there. I think it actually might be just dot. Let's try again and find out. Now I can submit this form without any values in it because I didn't require it. So I can come here, hit submit, and nope. All right, one more shot before I actually Google it. Just slash. It's one of those things if you don't use it. I typically don't redirect to the index page. So if you don't use it for a minute, then you forget how to do it. Yep, I'm Googling this. All right, it was simple. /index, not ./index. I think that may have changed over time. I believe it used to be dot. But add address, submit, now it goes back to the beginning. But what if we wanted to make a change to our page here and say, instead of saying welcome user, we're going to say welcome to Scranton, based upon the user's city where they lived? Well, we could do that. Let's go over to the index page and go to the page model. And in here, we're going to change this to be city. Now, if the city is null, then what we're going to do is, we'll say the web. So we'll say welcome to the web if they don't have an address. So here, instead of first name, it's going to be city. And we're going to say welcome to. So welcome to Scranton, welcome to Philadelphia, welcome to the web if you don't have anything. Let's try this. We'll launch this up. Kestrel is starting. And now the web page is started. It says welcome to the web. Add an address. I'm just going to put a city in. Scranton. Hit submit. Welcome to the web. Nothing's changed so far. Well, that's because we didn't actually pass any values back. How do we do that? Well, we can come over to our add address. We have is redirect a page. If we do a Control-Shift space here, we notice we have the third of 8 overloads. And one of them is object route values. So we can add a route value. So let's say new empty object, or a new anonymous object. We're going to say city equals address dot city. So it's an anonymous object that we're creating. Now it's going to gray us out because this address dot city, this city property, can be the name. It's assumed to be the name of the property in the anonymous object. I've been explicit here and said, oh, it's city. But if I did not include this, then what it would do is it would create a new property in the anonymous object called city and put this value into it. Let's try it again. Let's run this. It's starting up Kestrel. It says, welcome to the web. I'm going to say Scranton, and I'll hit submit. Welcome to Scranton. Notice up in the URL, let's zoom in on that, it says $city equals Scranton. So it's posting it's putting the value on this page using a get, which means you have to have that marked as allowing a get command to display this on the page. However, by doing that, we can now customize this index page based upon the address you added. Now, one of the questions I always get asked is, okay, Tim, now that you've done this, how do you do data access with Razor Pages? And then the next question will be, okay, now that you've shown me how to do data access with Razor Pages, how do you do it with MVC? How about API? How about Blazor? And the answer for all of those is the same, because I want to emphasize this very, very clearly. Your data access should not depend on which user interface you use. Your data access should be exactly the same regardless of which user interface you want to use. I just did a Foundation C# module, a whole course on data access. And for most of it, I used console applications to show us how to work with a specific data access type, because it wasn't actually the user interface that mattered. All that mattered was the class library code I wrote to talk to the database, because then the console could call it, or a Razor Pages application could call it. And in fact, I showed that at one point where I created a Razor Pages application and called a very, very similar class library that was called by the console application. I called it with Razor Pages. Same data access layer. Did not matter. So here, when we're talking about the add address, and we're saying, okay, we've got this model. I'm not doing anything with this model yet. Save model to database. Okay, that's where the code goes right there. But I have this address model. Do you know what I would do with that? I would give this to a class library and say, hey, you save this to SQL or to MongoDB or Cosmos or an API. Doesn't matter. You save it. And then I don't care what happens. I've given you a model. You take the data from there and save it. That's what would happen. On the other side, let's say the index page, where we have this on get. Maybe I want data from the database. Maybe I want to pull this city based upon who's logged in. Well, I wouldn't actually talk to the database directly. I would say, okay, data access layer, which is in the class library, you give me the user city. And I wouldn't have to worry in this application about where it's getting it from. In the class library, it would worry about, okay, I need to get that from SQL. And so it would call SQL, do the calls, and return a model. That's all it returned. So for the user interface, it does not matter which data access you use. And for the data access, it doesn't matter which user interface you use. That's how a disconnected architecture works. You really, 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 really do not want to tie your database directly to your user interface. That means you have to replace your entire application when you change one of them. That's not a good thing because user interfaces change a lot. So do databases. You don't want to just swap out your entire application for a new one every time you want to make a change with one of them. That's how you get stuck with the same user interface 20 years after it's out of date, or the same database structure or database system 20 years after it's no longer supported, because you tied everything together. Don't do that. Okay, I did say we're going to publish this, so let's do that. Now I do have a course on the application lifecycle design, which is where we take a web application with two different database types. One is Entity Framework and one is just regular SQL Server. And we deploy all three of those to three different environments: development, staging, and production. I have a course that builds out a complete architecture for that in Azure DevOps and shows the CI/CD process, the continuous integration and continuous deployment. That's out of the scope of this video. This video is about just Razor page applications. So I'm not going to go that far. Instead, we're going to right-click on Razor Pages UI and click Publish. And here we have a number of options. We can publish as an app service to Windows, to Linux, as a virtual machine, or we can even publish to IIS or a folder. A folder will give you the published files that you can then copy to an IIS installation or something else. We're going to publish to an app service in Azure. Now, you could select an existing, or you can create a new one. What I'm going to do instead, I'm going to take you to the portal. This is the Azure portal. Now, Azure is not entirely free, and that's something I try really hard to avoid showing you things where I say, okay, here's this really cool thing you can do, but you have to pay for it. Okay? I really try hard to avoid that, which is also why I don't use plugins that are paid in my Visual Studio environment. I try to avoid that so you don't feel like you're less than if you can't afford something. That's also why I provide so much free content on YouTube, because not everyone can afford my courses. And I understand that. You don't have to. You can take the free courses and put together your own education, because I'll provide you a ton of great resources. But Azure does provide you with a lot of free stuff. I believe when you sign up, there's about $200 they give you in free credit. Then there'll be some services that are free for a full year. After that, there's, I think, 20 or 25 services now that will be free for life. One of those services is a app service. Okay, an app service is typically a website. All right, so we're going to create one of these. Now, the free version is the very, very base tier. And I will show you what that is. You're not going to be running your business off of this. But I clicked Create a Resource Web App. Now, just because you can't run a business off it doesn't mean it's not great for testing. This is a perfect place to test. So this is a new web app, and it's going to ask me a number of things, one of which is, what is my subscription? Now, just know, I believe you have to have a credit card in order to activate the free subscription. They will not charge you. However, you do have to have that card. And so that does cause some problems in some countries. If that's a problem because of your country, you can contact Microsoft. Sometimes they can work with you and get you set up anyway. Okay, so don't let that stop you. Ask nicely for help. All right? So we have this. I have a Visual Studio Enterprise subscription, which gives me $150 worth of credit every month. If you have an MSDN or Enterprise subscription, or if you have a few other options from Microsoft, then you'll also probably have some free credit. Just find out. So you have to link it to a subscription, but then you have a resource group. Resource groups are just names. They're not paid. They don't cost you anything. I encourage you, especially when you are doing demos or doing learning, create a resource group around what you're learning or your demo group. And then at the end, you can delete that entire resource group and make sure you don't have anything charging you. It's also good to group things in general. Okay, so always create a resource group. If you already have one, you can select it from the list. But I'm going to create a new one here, and it's just as easy as giving it a name. In this case, I'm going to call this my Razor Pages Demo Resource Group. Yeah, it's a little long, but it's descriptive. And I always end it in resource group, so I know that that's what that thing is. It's a resource group. Now I need to give this web app a name. This is unique across all of Azure. Notice it says .azurewebsites.net. This will be the public URL for it. So if I say Razor Pages, I get a green check mark. Evidently, no one's taken the Razor-Pages name. So I'm going to leave that. If you don't get a red check mark, if you get a, let's go test, you get a, this name is not available. Okay, so Razor, someone already took Razor, but Razor Pages is not taken. I can claim that. Now, publish, you want code or a Docker container. We're not going to do Docker, we're doing just code. And I want a runtime stack of .NET Core 3.0. The cool thing about .NET Core is, even if your stack is not available, let's say you chose .NET Core 3.1, which is not available yet on Azure. You can publish .NET Core 3.1 with your web application and get it to run on Azure. But in our case, it's easy because we have .NET Core 3.0 already supported. I'm going to choose the Windows operating system because that's what I'm publishing from. And I'm going to choose that I want a region of East US because that is, that's where I'm at. Okay, that's my location is the East Coast. Therefore, this will be closest to me. If you have an audience, let's say that maybe you're in Germany, but your audience is mostly in South America, then you would choose a region that's closest to your audience in South America. Okay? That way it's fastest for them. All right. Now, down here we have our Windows plan. I already have a Windows plan. So I have just one in this region. So it's the region, it's the operating system type and it's the publish type. All three of these have to be the same or correct in order to match up your Windows plan. Okay, so if I chose Docker, this list would be empty because I don't have a Docker Windows system in the East US. But since I have one for code in Windows in East or in US, then that shows up. I'm going to say create new. This app service plan is going to be called Razor App Service Plan. I hit OK. Now that I create a new one, it seems like, oh, cool, I'm done. Stop. Don't hit next because you are now being charged this amount for a standard S1 server. Let's hit change size here. A standard S1 server in my region costs $43.80 US dollars per month. Now, honestly, that's no big deal when you're talking about a production website. $43 a month is just over $1.30 a day. And if you're doing testing, that's probably also not that big a deal because it's $1.30 a day. If you have $200 in credits and you're going to test this for 2 days, you're going to spend $2.60 of your credit. That's not a big deal. However, if you want the free site, notice up here it says production. We want dev/test. And there's F1, this orange one that says shared infrastructure, 1 gigabyte of memory, 60 minutes per day of compute, and it's free. That's what you want. Now, 60 minutes per day of compute does not mean it only runs for 60 minutes a day. What it means is that if you click on the website and it takes a minute to do all the processing, that's 1 minute of compute. You do that 60 times and the website stops. Obviously, that's not great for production, but it's great for testing because you probably will not use 60 minutes of compute per day. And again, it's free for life. Hit apply, and now we're on the free F1 plan. So make sure it says free F1 unless you're willing to pay for it. We're going to skip the monitoring. That's the monitoring tab and the tags tab. We'll go right to create and review and create. And we're going to hit create. Now again, this video is not about creating web apps, but I do want to show you this so you can see how to publish our very, very simple but yet still functional web application. So what's happening right now is Azure is deploying for us a server, and it's getting it all set up and configured so we can deploy our code right to this server. All right, it just finished deploying. It took a little bit. I paused the video for just a minute, but now it's complete. And if we click this little bell icon, we can see that the deployment succeeded. We can pin it to our dashboard. Click that. And now I can close this out. We can also close this out and go to our dashboard where we have the Razor Pages web app. Click this and we'll see that we have a URL up here, razor-pages.azurewebsites.net. We can click on that and we can go to our Razor Pages application, which right now is just a placeholder. Notice we can deploy just about anything to this location. Node, Java, Python, PHP, Ruby, or .NET Core. Let's now take us down, and we were back to our publish target. We can say select existing. Hit create profile. This is going to talk to my subscription, and it says, okay, where are we talking to? And it says the resource group, and I have a resource group here, Razor Pages Demo Resource Group. Sound familiar? Inside there is Razor Pages. That's the new thing I just created. Now I can hit OK. What this will do is it will create a publish profile that publishes to that location. I can configure it. For example, the .NET Core framework, well, it's .NET Core 3. Deployment mode is framework dependent or self-contained. by default framework dependent. That's much, much smaller a footprint. However, if this was a .NET Core 3.1 app, I would select self-contained to take .NET Core with my application when it published it. But I can leave that as it is. You can also select other options like database if there was one, file publish options, for example, remove additional files at destination. That could be good. I'm going to hit save. I'm going to hit publish. Now, this is not the way to do a full development cycle. This is just for testing. If you want to do a full development cycle, again, that application lifecycle design course I have talks about how do you do this so it automatically builds for you and it automatically does checks and then it automatically publishes. Now, our publish has succeeded. It's already refreshed the page to say welcome to the web. Notice razorpages.azurewebsites.net. Add address. If I were to say, notice it's already got a pre-fill here. So if I hit submit now, welcome to Scranton. So our web page is operational on Azure. That wasn't very painful at all. Now, as you watch this demo, this page will not be here because I don't want to keep paying for it. Now, it's free. I'm not actually paying for it, but I'm going to demonstrate to you what do you do when you're done with this stuff. Well, I use a resource group. Notice in my Razor pages, I could hit delete here. However, it says resource group, Razor Pages Demo Resource Group. If I click that, everything associated with this Razor Pages application is listed here. Notice it's not just an app service. It's also application insights and app service plan. All three of these were created when I created my app service. I didn't realize that when I was creating one thing, I created three things. However, since I tagged that one thing with the resource group, it tagged everything that it created with that same resource group. Now that I've selected the resource group, I can come up here and say delete resource group. If I click this, I have to type in the resource group name, which I can copy from here. But this is to stop you from just hitting delete accidentally. Because once you delete this, it's gone. Gone. You can't bring it back. Okay? So therefore, now that I've typed this in here and I hit delete, it's going to delete the app service plan, the Razor Pages Insights page, and the app service page as well. It'll all be gone. I hit delete. This is going to take a bit. It's not an immediate thing. But this will make sure that this no longer shows up on my bill. Again, I use something free, but if I hadn't, if I'd use a SQL Server, or if I use Cosmos DB, or other things that are charged to me, when I'm doing it in demo, it's fine because I'm just demoing it. It'll cost me a couple dollars, $2 or $3 a day, depending on what I'm getting. However, I don't want to keep being charged day after day after day. So once I'm done, I delete the resource group and all the resources inside of it, and now they're all gone, and so are any future costs. Okay? So that page will be gone very, very shortly. Once it's gone, note that this publish profile won't work anymore. So I'm going to delete this publish profile. That way it's gone, it's not associated, and you don't accidentally publish to it. So that's an introduction to ASP.NET Core Razor Pages. I do want to show you that just like any other .NET Core program, there is the program.cs, which does do a little bit of configuration. And the biggest thing is it points to startup, which is where, for example, dependency injection is configured. If you wanted to add something to dependency injection, you would do it here just like you've seen with other .NET Core projects. There are a couple of things that are additional. For example, use exception handler, and it sends it to the /error page, which that's the default error page right there. And we have map Razor pages right down here. So there's a couple extra entries here, but for the most part, this is a standard startup page. So if you're familiar with .NET Core in general, this is very, very familiar. It just has a few additional pieces, okay? So that's it for an intro to Razor pages and how they work. Hopefully you got a picture of how to work with these. They're very, very quick, very easy to use, especially compared to MVC, which is a little bit larger and bulkier and has a little more overhead. But we could bring MVC into this and mix the two and have MVC and Razor pages depending on how we structured it. Okay, so that's an overview. Hopefully you got something out of that. If you want to take it further, I do have a few courses that might help. Also some videos on YouTube that might help. For example, there's an Azure DevOps video on YouTube that will show you more about how to use a web page with Azure DevOps for continuous integration and deployment. And if you want to go a step further, that's that application lifecycle design course. Right? There's also an intro to .NET Core, which does some introduction to Razor pages, as well as MVC and API, among others. And there's other content as well if you want to go to iamtimcorey.com. Okay? Thanks for watching so much. And as always, I am Tim Corey.